As we have seen in this international conference, the issue of poverty and the issue of environment are very interlinked, because most poor people live on the land. They depend on their soils, they depend on their forests, they depend on their waters, and they depend on rainfall that falls on that land. They depend on the food that they grow on that land. So when that environment becomes degraded, for example, if they lose the topsoil, or if they do not get rainfall, and they cannot grow food, or they cannot grow adequate food, they starve to death. And so we see that the environment is extremely important to ensure livelihoods of communities. These two are like two sides of the coin. They cannot be separated. It's a great threat for Africa, but it's also a great threat for the whole world. I think that at the rate that the population is increasing everywhere, which is a good thing in many ways, because it's an indicator of improvements in health, in nutrition, in many parts of the world. But at the same time, it does put a lot of pressure on the resources, because while we are increasing the population, we are not able to expand the planet. We are not able to expand the environment. Every scientist who is studying climate change tells us that Africa is a very vulnerable continent. And so it is extremely important for the national leadership of Africa to be conscious about this.
You know, rich countries have the ability to do more being richer. So to that extent, if we say that everyone should do what they can, you're demanding something from rich countries which all poor countries may not be able to provide. Now that's something which the rich countries also accept. They don't say, why shouldn't Africa do exactly what France is trying to do today in helping each other? Now, I think that's recognized, but I think it's a mistake to think that it's something when the rich countries will take the initiative and good things will happen in poor countries. It's not like that. You need a kind of collaborative process in which poor countries collaborate in the removal not only of local poverty, but also of global poverty. I mean, to give one example, terrorism and violence have often emanated from some of the poorest countries, and that have fouled up the lives of very rich countries. So the poor countries can do a great deal to control terrorism, to prevent violence, to prevent the kind of distrust, suspicion, and hostility that is sometimes generated and then take the form of terrorist movement. So I think you have to think about what each country can do maximally, within its means, within its ability, bearing in mind that the commitment to remove poverty across the world, expansion, real freedom, is a global commitment. Local input will come in many different forms from rich countries as well as poor ones. But we don't have to say they have to do exactly the same thing in the different countries.
I think that the biggest problem we have is the politics. Politics is always influenced by interests, private interests, companies, businesses, which always put their profits ahead of the time. And politicians listen to this more than they listen to organizations like the Green Belt movement. When you say that we should protect wetlands and deltas, companies are very busy saying we need deltas to grow food for people, without realizing that by destroying wetlands and destroying watersheds and destroying dams, you are undermining the water system that farmers need. So the biggest problem we have is with the politicians, and I want to call upon the political leadership, both at the national level and at the global level, to really take the issue of environment seriously. As far back as 1972, when we started talking seriously about the environment, we have continued to use the environment as something that we can expand, something that we can wait with, like something that we can deal with tomorrow. But now we are seeing, especially with the new threats of climate change, global warming, water scarcity throughout the world. We are seeing that the whole world is threatened by our neglect to address the issue of the environment. And it is the leadership, it's the leadership I want to repeat, because ordinary citizens can take community action, like Green Belt movement. And many communities take action. Many communities recycle, reduce, reuse. But in the final analysis, the decisions that need to be made to really make the major difference is at the global and national level, government level.
I think there are two things to do. I think growth models are important in emphasizing that growth of income is a very central issue in the process of generating public revenue, which helps in economic development because it allows you, gives you money to start schools, hospitals, and so on. It's also very good in reducing public debt. I'm somewhat critical at the moment of European policy because it seemed to attach less importance to economic growth and much greater importance to cutting down the deficit immediately. So I think you have to emphasize the importance of economic growth on one side, but all the time bear in mind that growth with the generation of income is wanted for a certain purpose. It could be for a reduction of public debt when the public debt is very big. It could be for expansion of schools for girls or hospitals in rural areas. Whatever it is, you have to think about the importance of the intermediation of growth on one side, as well as use of the fruits that are generated by growth for the purpose for which we want growth, namely the expansion of living standards, real freedoms and capabilities of people.
What I want to emphasize is the fact that working at grassroots level, we are talking about working with local communities. And we are saying that unless we work with local communities, which work on the land and which need the environmental services that we are talking about, we cannot make a difference. But lifting the people at the bottom is very hard work, because these people sometimes they do not have the knowledge, sometimes they don't have the motivation, sometimes they are very worried about survival rather than long-term goals of protecting the environment. Sometimes they just don't make the linkage between the fact that if they do not plant a tree today, they will be worse off 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. They think of today. They want to survive today. They want to cut the last day today, to cook the last meal today. So they can be extremely heavy. But we need to realize that we have to lift them. We have to work with them for them to realize that it is their livelihoods. But many governments and many development agencies, they would rather cut short the lifting, stop the heavy lifting, do the right lifting. But by doing so, we are only delaying other development. We are only delaying development. We cannot do real development without real heavy lifting of the people who need the lifting.